that idea of being a man with options, right? That idea of having abundance.
Yeah.
Think of it from a woman's perspective. If a guy who doesn't have any options at all gives her praise, well, then it's kind of meaningless. Like
Right.
his attention and his validation is kind of meaningless. Versus a guy who clearly has abundance and clearly has options, if he tells her she's beautiful, well, then it actually means something.
Yeah.
That his attention and his validation and his respect actually have weight to it compared to the other guy.
Yeah. And attention as a currency, I think, is a concept that I've been thinking about a lot more lately. And maybe you know this intuitively after you've had enough experience with women, but you can, so attention is this finite currency that obviously women are competing for from men, but also you can add value to your attention as an individual by becoming higher value and making that actually worth something. And that, as you're saying, comes from having other people sort of, or looking like a guy, or appearing or living as a guy whose attention people value, right? And so it's interesting about the time that you spent in bars and clubs, because I think the first time I was introduced to the idea of pickup, in 2005, reading the game or whatever, and this notion of just going out and getting these reps. And of course, that makes intuitive sense because you're like, oh, right, it's like football. It's like a sport. You just got to put in these 1,000 hours. Although it's cool nowadays, this community has seemed to morph into like, hey, don't go out there and just lie to women all the time. Or that's like, sure, use that as practice, but ultimately the real thing should be becoming that guy, right? Becoming the guy who is excellent, who is confident, who is actually a high value masculine man. And so when he says these things and approaches in a certain way, it's authentic, right? But how long did it take you to sort of master this, to go from being a dork, a self-described, right, geek, to feeling like you had an understanding of how to approach and interact with women without any anxiety? Because I think that's what prevents most guys from doing that in the first place is it's tremendously anxiety inducing to approach women who you don't know.
Yeah. It probably took me a good couple of years, probably good 2 years of consistent effort grinding.
Yeah.
And obviously during that time I had girlfriends and I was going, and I was having success. But after a couple of years, it really started to sort of, it wasn't a thing I was doing anymore. It was who I was. It solidified in my head.
Yeah.
And that I kind of think of it as like a calming,
right.
Like it's just this calm energy around, like the nervousness around women was replaced with just being calm around women.
I remember actually trying, when I was first kind of trying to use some of the things that I learned in the game or whatever in my early 20s. And, looking back, it's like, man, there's so many things about being in your early 20s as a guy that are a disadvantage. But I remember going into certain social situations with higher energy than was needed. When you kind of come in and you're like, hey, what's up? Like, there's a time and a place for it, but you're almost like, in my mind, a mistake was thinking that you kind of have to be entertaining to somebody, as if you're on, like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to crack a joke and turn to you and be kind of almost bordering on manic in order to get women to be attracted to you or be captivating. But the truth is almost the opposite. As you're saying, the more you can calm yourself down, because that signals to somebody that, in part, something we've already talked about, high value, because this is nothing to you. Talking to people and a beautiful woman doesn't escalate your heart rate, right? Which is the first step in sort of the physical manifestation of stress. So if you can approach a beautiful woman who's used to men being nervous around her with a calm energy, I think it conveys a lot to women. So maybe you could talk about that.
Think about what causes nervousness in social interactions. We are always, if let's say you're in a room with a celebrity, and there's a group of people around that celebrity all listening to him, he is usually the most calm person in the room, and everybody else is emotionally reacting to him.
Yeah. He
says something, everyone else bursts out into laughter, or they start to fidget with their body. They can't sort of control, like they're touching their face, they're fiddling with their hands or something like that, right? So the way I think about it is the idea of how calm you can be in a social interaction or in an interaction with women tells you, or tells her rather, how hard it is for people to emotionally affect you.
Yeah.
And that the ability to be unaffected emotionally is a big signal of status.
Yeah.
Right? Because the person who's the most nervous, the most, the most nervous, the most fidgety, the most awkward is typically the person with the lowest status in a social interaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the person who's calm and collected and has confidence in what they're saying, again, tends to have the higher status in an interaction.